really, this is a fitting way to conclude the convention. I mean, we started off with the program playing it safe, as I said in earlier rebuttals, and really just talking about Jesus. But the problem is, this is a cult that cannot help but show their true nature. We've already had an Armageddon Bible reading that's shown very graphically what people can look forward to if they are opposers. And now we're being told that Armageddon is good news. It's just around the corner. We're in the last of the last days. Gonna happen any day now. Basically the same old tired rhetoric, like a record on repeat. But at least they're being honest to some degree. They're putting their cards on the table and they're letting everyone know just how culty and doomsday they are. Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Attic. In this video, I'll be sharing my thoughts on the Sunday, the concluding day of the 2024 Declare the Good News Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, as with the previous 2 days, there is no shortage of nonsense for us to wade through. So without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
Hebrews 12:5 and 6 says, "And you have entirely forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons. My son, do not belittle the discipline from Jehovah, nor give up when you are corrected by him. For those whom Jehovah loves, he disciplines. In fact, he scourges or he punishes everyone he receives as a son." Yes, this is what takes place. We're warned in this scripture not to do two different things. First of all, we don't want to belittle the discipline as if it didn't have much value or if it didn't apply to us. If we were to do that, we could be turning away from a really nice suggestion and helpful advice from our God, Jehovah. And also, as stated, we don't want to give up when we're corrected, as if too much is expected out of us. It's just too much. Jehovah expects too much. Can't do it. Not going to do it. That's not the right attitude to display. Now, we do know that discipline is emotionally painful at times. However, if we focused only on the pain, then we would miss the point completely. See, Satan wants us to focus on the pain. Satan wants us to take it personal. Satan loves to see those wedges driven between the brothers. He loves to see people leave Jehovah and the congregation. It's his entertainment. We don't want to fall for that.
So now we know what Satan uses for entertainment. We've just been listening to Joel Kostachuk. He is the convention overseer for this particular convention, and he's taking us through the symposium item, Imitate Those Who Had Faith in the Good News, Zechariah. Just as a bit of context, they are talking about the part of the story, the narrative of just before Jesus' life, when Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, doesn't believe the angel, and as punishment, he isn't allowed to talk. So the angel tells him, Elizabeth's going to give birth, even though she's, as they put it, barren. And because he doesn't believe the angel to begin with, Zechariah is punished by being made mute for a period. So that's the context to what we've been hearing. But unmistakably, what's being referred to here is discipline that the organization dishes out to its members, whether it's in the form of reduced privileges or the form that many of us are familiar with, shunning. Apparently, those who Jehovah loves, he scourges. Like any completely healthy, non-toxic father. That's what Jehovah does. to those he loves, he tortures them. Um, but seriously, on a serious note, I can remember being given this sort of nonsense when I was being bent over my father's knee and lashed with a belt back in the days when Jehovah's Witnesses very solidly pushed corporal punishment. They've kind of backed off corporal punishment a little bit in recent years, or they don't encourage members to do it in quite the fervour, or with quite the fervour that they used to. But I was routinely told, "Oh, I'm doing this because I love you. It hurts me to do this, Lloyd, but I've got to discipline you because I love you." And again, what a toxic, narcissistic, psychopathic thing to say to somebody. I don't agree, I'm afraid. I think when you love someone, you don't torture them. And particularly in the context of shunning as a form of discipline, we are talking about a form of punishment that traumatizes people.
Now, at this point, Elizabeth was well in her years. So what about her children at this point? She had none. She was barren. Now, and that is different from what we choose today, because today, many couples will decide not to have children for the sake of furthering their service in Jehovah God's organization. But Elizabeth, it says barren. So this is not a choice that she could not have children.
So this was an interesting little soundbite from Shelton Edwards, who is an elder from the Glenmere Lake congregation. No indication that he is a Bethelite, at least not in the introductory remarks before he gave his talk. And he's just making this open admission of what is, I guess, common knowledge among Jehovah's Witnesses, that many Jehovah's Witnesses or Jehovah's Witness couples will make the decision to not have children because they feel that by having children, they will be limited in the way that they can worship Jehovah. They're worried that children will get in the way of their worship of God. And it's useful to hear this kind of spelled out so clearly. It's not spelled out this clearly very often. Just to educate people that this is another one of the many ways in which becoming a Jehovah's Witness will impact your life. I mean, don't get me wrong, having children is certainly not for everybody, you know. But it's one of those things where when you become a Jehovah's Witness, or if you're raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and you later realize that the beliefs don't make any sense, that in fact it's a harmful, toxic, controlling group, if you reach that realization once you're past being able to have children for biological reasons, it can be heartbreaking because there's a missed opportunity. You might have been the sort of person who would otherwise have wanted to have children, who would otherwise have brought children into the world, but you never got that chance because you were chasing something that just isn't real.
In the following dramatization, note what helps a father to put primary emphasis on his family's spiritual needs while also providing for their material needs.
Hey.
Hey, babe. We need to talk.
Okay.
My boss called me in right at the end of the day. Said that I need to start traveling for 2 weeks out of the month.
What did you tell him?
I told him I would think about it. I only have till the end of the week to decide. I can't lose this job.
They really put you in a tough spot.
It feels impossible.
What does Jehovah want you to do?
He wants me to provide for my family, but
What does that really mean?
What does it mean? It's not just money. What would happen if I spend all this time away?
I told you a bunch of times to do the laundry. Why are you too bad? Too bad you were even supposed to play today. Turn off the game. No, turn off the game.
As we look at verses 21 and see how many times David actually refers back.
We don't have to study this.
You know you're not gonna play video games until we finish them.
What is there
You're
to
not
get?
gonna
This
remember.
is simple stuff. I don't close friendship with Jehovah.
What kind of husband and father do I want to be? Joseph worked hard without sacrificing time with his family. He invested in them spiritually. I need to provide for my family in every way. I can't do that if I'm not here. We sat down as a family and discussed ways that we could simplify, knowing that I might lose my job. We weren't sure how Jehovah was going to take care of us, but we were ready to trust him.
Yes, trusting Jehovah. That's what it's all about in these situations. So we've just been watching a dramatization that gets shown during the Imitate Those Who Had Faith in the Good News Symposium. This particular symposium item has the sub-theme Joseph, and the talk is delivered by Andrew Crook from Wallkill. And I guess my issue with this is that it's just repeating the same message that gets repeated in convention after convention after convention, which is that secular employment should not come in the way of your worship as a Jehovah's Witness. I mean, how many dramatizations do we need at this point? I mean, I'm not going to go through like a clips montage, but trust me, there have been many dramatizations in preceding years dealing with the exact same subject. Apparently, in this particular instance, if the guy were to do more time at his job, his family would implode in terms of their spirituality. His son would start zoning out at meetings. I think that's going to happen anyway, to be honest. It would be a catastrophe with family worship and all those other things. So he needs to basically put his job on the line and find ways to simplify. This is an organization that always demands sacrifice in some form. And in this particular scenario, it's being made very, very clear that financial stability and job security comes second. Worship as a Jehovah's Witness comes first.
Well, in the following dramatization, note how building faith can equip young ones to reject what is bad.
Wait, she said what?
Yeah, man, it was weird.
Thanks, boys. We'll be ready to eat soon.
Soon means we got an hour. Let's get a game in.
All right.
Wait, so I thought you said she had a girlfriend.
Yeah, she does, but she likes boys and girls.
Oh.
But she said it's not that big of a deal, though.
Wait, so then what'd you tell her?
Nothing, I ghosted her.
You can't just avoid her. Come on, you gotta stand up for your beliefs.
Yeah, and say what? You know, you're cute and whatever, but the Bible told me I can't hook up with you.
Come on, man.
I know what I'm supposed to say and everything, but if I say it, everyone's just gonna think I'm like closed-minded or something.
And why do you care what they think?
I mean, sometimes it's just like, I don't even know what I believe or why I believe it.
But isn't it worth trying to figure it out?
Is that even possible?
That's what Jesus did. The religious teachers back then, they were teaching things that were completely different than what the scriptures taught. But Jesus, even as a kid, he wasn't confused or intimidated by them. He knew the truth, and he wasn't afraid to take a stand for it. I had to ask Jehovah to help me believe the truth like that.
And has he helped you?
Well, so far, every time I've had a question, I found answers. Let me actually share with you an interesting article I found.
Joaquin showed me that the things I struggle with, the questions I thought were complicated, had clear answers in God's word. The world is so confused about what's right and what's wrong. Maybe that's why it seems they're so unhappy. But Jehovah's standards are always better for us. And he gives us friends we can learn from. Friends who help us draw close to him.
What a perfect way to spend the evening. Get your projector out, get your friends round, and watch some Jehovah's Witness propaganda about Jesus. So this is another dramatization from the symposium, Imitate Those Who Had Faith in the Good News. This particular part of the symposium dealing with Jesus, and it's once again dipping into this area of sexual repression and homophobia. So apparently this young lad who is chatting to his friend while they're playing a computer game, he isn't vocal enough about his disdain for gay people in a situation where he wants to hook up with a girl who is apparently bisexual, who likes both boys and girls. I'm a bit confused as to why he thinks he can hook up anyway with someone at school, given the fact that he's only allowed to date people who are of his faith. So that part of the story is a bit confusing. But the take-home message, the part that's supposed to stick in our heads from this exchange, is that young Jehovah's Witnesses in particular ought to be clear in their convictions, so clear that they can make a stand even when their beliefs are unpopular. So the correct thing for this lad to do was to humiliate the bisexual girl at school by telling her that her sexuality was an abomination. I mean, have I misread things? That seems to be the advice that his friend is giving him, advice that is endorsed by the organisation, or they wouldn't have portrayed things the way they've portrayed them. And I just can't help but find it ironic that young people here are being told to question their beliefs. I mean, is this really a message that the organisation wants to be drilling home too hard? Because the problem with questioning your beliefs is if you subject your beliefs to too much scrutiny, they tend to come undone. I mean, obviously, when you're a Jehovah's Witness, their idea of questioning your beliefs and putting them to the test is to just listen to everything that the organization's publications say. And apparently, the organization's publications have an answer for everything. That's the message that we've just heard. Unfortunately, that's not quite the case. There are many aspects of Jehovah's Witness beliefs that are unbiblical. I've done a video on some of the unbiblical teachings that Jehovah's Witnesses have. And there are many, many things that Jehovah's Witnesses teach that make no logical sense whatsoever. I guess I agree with the whole idea of young Jehovah's Witnesses challenging their beliefs. I would just suggest that they're not going to find meaningful answers in Jehovah's Witness publications which push a very fundamentalist, literalist, controlling, manipulative message that includes incredibly toxic, backwards, hateful, homophobic rhetoric that young Jehovah's Witnesses in school should rightly be ashamed of.
See, how do you know what's propaganda versus what's really just normal behavior? The key is to imitate Jesus. How do we do that? In two ways. Let's open our Bibles to the first way. It's identified in John chapter 8, verse 31 and 32. John 8, verse 31. Then Jesus went on to say to the Jews who had believed him, "If you remain in my word, you are really my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Jesus gave us this simple rule to combat propaganda. Know the truth. Think deeply about Jehovah, just like Jesus did. Remember what our young brother said in the video? He said Jesus wasn't confused or intimidated by religious leaders. He knew the truth, and he wasn't afraid to take a stand for it. Make sure that you know the truth, that you understand what you believe and why you believe it. See, Satan doesn't want you to think like that. He doesn't want you to think clearly and to reason things out. It's because he knows that propaganda is more effective when people don't think critically. Don't be content to just passively accept whatever you hear from your peers. Too many people today are just floating down the stream of public opinion, just allowing it to take them wherever it's going to lead. You can be different. You can choose to push against that current. Use your thinking ability to make the truth your own.
Yes, thinking critically. That's what Jehovah's Witnesses should be doing more of. According to Josiah Naaman from the Warwick Bethel, he's taking us through the symposium item, Imitate Those Who Had Faith in the Good News Jesus. And he's giving his follow-up remarks to the dramatization that we just saw, where these young Jehovah's Witnesses were, I guess, processing the homophobic elements of their beliefs, and one was giving a pep talk to the other on the need to make sure of his faith so that he wouldn't feel intimidated about taking an extremely judgmental, bigoted stand with his bisexual schoolmate, who apparently he was allowed to approach romantically. Still confuses me, that. But yeah, this part of the convention took me completely by surprise, if I'm honest, because I'm not sure this is advice Jehovah's Witnesses ought to be given. To do more thinking, to exercise critical thinking skills. I think that's kind of the opposite of what they need to be doing if they want to stay as Jehovah's Witnesses. I think they need to just listen to what the organization is telling them without asking any questions whatsoever, without scrutinizing their beliefs in any form. If there's any part of this convention where any of the speakers have given me grounds to think, is this maybe a PMO? Is this maybe like a PMO Bethelite who's trying to weave something in just to kind of, help those who are in the audience move towards the light, this is probably the part that I would choose. But seriously, I don't think that's what's happening here. I think that Josiah Naaman is reading from his outline. I think everything that we've heard at this convention has come from the outline. And I think it's just the product of an organization that is absolutely convinced that it must be true. I think the leaders are completely deluded. They genuinely believe that their theology makes sense. And they believe that subjecting it to scrutiny, subjecting the teachings, the policies, everything, the history to scrutiny, will lead people to the conclusion that it's the truth. I suppose in that context, it's worthwhile asking the question, if you're so confident that it's the truth, why aren't you allowing Jehovah's Witness rank and file members to have access to all of their past literature? How come the material on JW Library or Watchtower Online Library only goes as far back as 1950 for the Watchtowers and 1970 for the Awakeson books? How come you're not letting Jehovah's Witnesses read, for example, Millions Now Living Will Never Die, where Rutherford predicted Armageddon to come in 1925? How come you're not letting Jehovah's Witnesses read those materials? How come you're limiting them in what they can use to reach these conclusions that you've decided they are going to reach if they think critically enough? I think all of this is quite shady and disingenuous, to be honest, because the truth of the matter is that Jehovah's Witnesses are shielded from many of the facts regarding the organization's past, facts that would help them reach the conclusion that it's an extremely man-made and flawed organization. So when this guy, Josiah Naaman, is talking about thinking critically, he's doing so knowing full well that most Jehovah's Witnesses don't know the first thing about critical thinking, having been robbed of those skills from an early age. So any kind of investigation, any kind of attempt to reach some kind of certainty regarding their beliefs using only the organization's materials or only a selected date range of the organization's materials is only going to lead them to the conclusions that the organization wants them to reach.
Because you may know that Jehovah's Witnesses are not universally loved. There are some people, and there are some powerful governments of this world who oppose us. Perhaps you even received a negative reaction from some to your interest in Jehovah's Witnesses or your desire to attend today's convention. Should any sort of opposition make you fear to associate with Jehovah's Witnesses? But what about those who oppose Jehovah and his worshipers? Will they succeed? What is their future? Again, Psalm 112 gives us the answer. Note with me Psalm 112, verse 10. It says, "The wicked one will see and be upset. He will grind his teeth and melt away. The desires of the wicked will perish." Enemies of Jehovah will not succeed in frightening his people, and soon they will be completely gone. The Bible promises that God's kingdom will soon remove the wicked and bring complete peace to the earth. This beautiful promise is expressed in Psalm 37, verses 10 and 11. Here's what it says: "Just a little while longer, and the wicked will be no more. You will look at where they were, and they will not be there. But the meek will possess the earth, and they will find their exquisite delight in the abundance of peace." Those verses beautifully describe the near future.
Do they now? Well, that was charming. Thank you so much, Keith Caldwell. He's been taking us through the public Bible discourse. So just to be clear, this is a talk that's intended for members of the public. This is for those who have accepted invitations to come to the convention, and this is a talk that's basically reaching out to them and pitching the Jehovah's Witness religion to those who don't know it or haven't grown up as Jehovah's Witnesses. That's the point of this talk. The theme is why we don't fear bad news. And on the subject of news, I guess he would have been remiss to not at least give some nod to the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses, as he said, aren't universally liked, or as I would put it, have a deserved terrible reputation when you do minimal digging online. And his solution to that problem of people opposing Jehovah's Witnesses is that one day they'll be gone.
Enemies of Jehovah will not succeed in frightening his people, and soon they will be completely gone.
Nothing culty about that, is there? We don't need to worry about people criticizing us. They're going to be gone soon. They're going to be destroyed at Armageddon. The problem he has is that when he's listing those who, quote unquote, oppose Jehovah's Witnesses, he's including those who are perhaps family members or close friends of those attending this convention for the first time or expressing an interest in Jehovah's Witnesses, who are trying to dissuade them from doing so. So automatically, these friends, relatives who aren't thrilled about the fact that you're attending a Jehovah's Witness convention aren't just wicked, just this blanket condemnation that anyone who doesn't love Jehovah's Witnesses is opposing them and therefore wicked. It's not just that. It's saying that anyone who opposes us is going to die. So I guess thank you, Keith Caldwell, for saying the quiet part out loud and making it so clear in the public Bible discourse of this year's convention that this is a doomsday cult that relishes the destruction of any who don't agree with the leaders.
After this, I heard what seemed to be a loud voice of a great crowd in heaven. They said,
"Praise God! The salvation and the glory and the power belong to our God, because his judgments are true and righteous. For he has executed judgment on the great prostitute, who corrupted the earth with her sexual immorality. And he has avenged the blood of his slaves that is on her hands."
And right away, for the second time, they said,
"Praise God!" And the smoke from her goes on ascending forever and ever.
Yes, praise Jah. Why? False religious leaders were responsible for the death of the prophets and of Jesus Christ himself. Later, the disciple Stephen asked the religious leaders, "Which one of the prophets did your forefathers not persecute?" Yes, they killed those who announced in advance the coming of the righteous one, whose betrayers and murderers you have now become. Instead of taking Stephen's rebuke to heart, they murdered him too, that same day. In the centuries since Stephen's day, false religion has continued to mislead, to slaughter, and to corrupt the earth with her sexual immorality. So once again we can ask, why praise Jah? The heavenly chorus answers, because God's judgments are true and righteous. Our just God, Jehovah, will make sure that false religion will never again defile this world and harm his loyal servants. The destruction of Babylon the Great marks the beginning of what Jesus called the Great Tribulation. After false religion is gone, what comes next? The book of Ezekiel foretells that the nations will attack Jehovah's people, coming like a vast army and like clouds covering the land. But this is not the first time that the political system has acted against Jehovah and his people. Many nations have fiercely opposed true worship. They've banned our meetings and our preaching work, imprisoned men and women, old and young, for the so-called crime of owning a Bible or talking about their God. Some of our brothers and sisters have even been tortured for their faith. Of course, as long as Jehovah allows human governments to rule over us, we respect them. And not all governments have actively opposed us. Still, human government itself is insulting to Jehovah.
You heard it, folks. Human government itself is insulting to Jehovah. So says Gage Flegel, governing body member, who is taking us through the dramatic Bible reading, which, as you've heard rather hilariously, is taken from selected verses in Revelation. I think we now all have a new ringtone. So I'm sorry. How were they recording this with a straight face? Praise Jah. How was nobody at any point saying, guys, I think this sounds weird. I think this sounds incredibly cheesy and corny, and therefore perhaps disrespectful to the message that we're supposed to be conveying from the Bible. This is an organization with zero self-awareness, and that's also clear in some of the images that we saw. I mean, let's take another look at that auditorium-style hall where you have world leaders pointing at a large screen with, let's see, is that David Splane, Jeffrey Jackson, Kenneth Cook, and Mark Sanderson, and a giant JW.org logo. Apparently that's how big the logo would need to be on the screen when the world leaders decide that they've had enough of Jehovah's Witnesses. And of course, it's when the world turns on Jehovah's Witnesses that Armageddon is supposed to come. Jesus and his angels are supposed to ride to the rescue at Armageddon and slaughter everybody to protect Jehovah's people. I just think it's worth noting that this isn't the first time they've used artwork like this, giving this ridiculous, delusional idea that they will be the focus of the world's attention. We've seen it before in similar artwork where you've had like a situation room where Samuel Hurd and the Warwick headquarters have been on a screen, apparently being scrutinized again by world leaders. This is an organization with a grossly inflated view of itself. And I think it's worth just highlighting that anti-government rhetoric that Gage Flegel was giving towards the end there.
Of course, as long as Jehovah allows human governments to rule over us, we respect them. And not all governments have actively opposed us. Still, human government itself is insulting to Jehovah.
Well, this is exactly the sort of rhetoric you should expect from an organization that shows such disdain for secular authorities in the area of child abuse. I mean, I've made countless videos by this point detailing the way Jehovah's Witnesses cover up child abuse on an industrial scale and keep secular authorities entirely out of the picture. And part of the way they're able to do that is to kind of speak from both sides of their mouths when it comes to their attitude towards governments. So on the one hand, Jehovah's Witnesses ought to be fine, upstanding citizens, ought to pay their taxes, ought to have respect for Caesar's governments. But on the other hand, they are to look upon them with disdain as an abomination, because how dare humans be ruling over themselves? It's really God who has the right to rule over humans. And when you take that logic to its full extent, it makes total sense that God's laws and requirements regarding the handling of sexual immorality should take precedence over the way governments deal with, let's just say it, crimes against children. So that's the kind of culture that we're dealing with in Jehovah's Witnesses. That's how abuse is so frequently and successfully and thoroughly covered up, because there's this underlying message continually repeated in Jehovah's Witness propaganda that governments aren't to be taken really that seriously. Yes, you should obey Caesar. Yes, you should be a fine, upstanding citizen, but ultimately governments are a temporary measure. What should take priority in all instances is God's way of doing things, and it's Jehovah's Witnesses who get to dictate that.
I saw also an angel standing in the sun, and he cried out with a loud voice and said to all the birds that fly in mid-heaven,
"Come here, be gathered together to the great evening meal of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, and the flesh of military commanders, and the flesh of strong men, and the flesh of horses, and of those seated on them, and the flesh of all, of free men, as well as of slaves, and of small ones and great."
And I saw the wild beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to wage war against the one seated on the horse and against his army. And the wild beast was caught, and along with it the false prophet that performed in front of it the signs with which he misled those who received the mark of the wild beast and those who worship its image. While still alive, they both were hurled into the fiery lake that burns with sulfur. But the rest were killed off with the long sword that proceeded out of the mouth of the one seated on the horse. And all the birds were filled with their flesh.
Who else but Christ Jesus would lead the heavenly forces to the Battle of Armageddon? False religion has already been destroyed. Now Jesus turns his attention to what remains of Satan's wicked world, its political and commercial systems. He dismantles, destroys, and brings to nothing all who oppose true worship on earth.
Yes, all who oppose true worship on earth, all who refuse to become Jehovah's Witnesses, will get a severe beating at Armageddon by Jesus, with his long sword. Is it me, or does his sword look a bit more like a lightsaber there? Maybe I've just been watching too much Star Wars, or maybe the Bethelites who make this artwork have been watching Star Wars, but I don't know, that just seems to me to be glowing rather than being a traditional sword. So yes, who knew? Jesus is a Jedi now. In addition to being a country singer, he's a Jedi, and He is going to annihilate all who oppose Jehovah. In all seriousness, this dramatic Bible reading is rather triggering, isn't it? It's laced with all of these sound effects, all of these noises of explosions and gunfire. I can imagine it making for pretty triggering viewing for many in the audience. And if you're a young child, you're going to be terrified as well, aren't you? You know, listening to all of those noises and thinking, oh yes, this is this terrifying destruction that's coming, and I don't want to be on the wrong end of it. And it's worth just repeating that an organization that relies upon fear in this way to drive home its message is clearly not an organization we ought to be taking seriously.
Now, once we're convinced Jesus was resurrected, that's a foundation. What gets built on that? My goodness, many, many good things. If Jesus was resurrected and went to heaven, it means now he's in heaven as the king of God's kingdom. It means he's already cleansed the heavens. Revelation tells us that. He's thrown Satan out. Soon, he's going to act, as we just saw heard in our sound drama, to cleanse the earth and destroy the wicked and preserve the great crowd. And that means it's not a fantasy for us to picture ourselves being in the new world. It's a sure certainty. Now, for a moment, do that. Imagine. Picture yourself in the new world. You are 1 billion years old, and you're just getting started, and you wake up in the morning and you realize, I don't have one ache or pain or blemish on my body. Can you even picture that? I can't.
Wait a minute. You've just asked your audience to picture something, and you're telling them that that's something that you can't do. So we've just been hearing from Kent Fisher, who is a US branch committee member, so not a governing body member, but fairly high up in the Watchtower hierarchy. He's giving the concluding talk of the convention, so, you know, quite a significant talk. I was kind of looking forward to maybe a governing body member giving this talk, and I feel a little bit shortchanged because Kent Fisher, bless him, I'm sure he has many attributes, but public speaking, I would humbly submit, is not one of them. He's quite a dull speaker. Bless his little heart. The theme of his talk is hold firmly to the good news, why and how. This is again supposed to be the rousing finale to the convention, and it ends up being more of a damp squib. And there's a perfect example of why, because people are being asked to imagine being 1 billion years old, which is just clearly nonsense. It's just silly, isn't it? And even the speaker kind of admits that it's silly, or admits that it's not something that he can imagine. So yeah, just an odd speaker, an odd way of bringing the convention to a conclusion, and a great example of how far-fetched and ridiculous Jehovah's Witness beliefs are.
Now, what about you? You've been serving for more than a day, for many days, maybe many months, many years, many decades. We commend you for your record of faithfulness to Jehovah, and we know Jehovah appreciates it even more than we do. And yet, no matter how long we've been holding firmly to the good news, none of us can afford to relax our hold on it. We are in the last of the last days of this system of things, and each passing day brings us closer to Armageddon. Armageddon. And we saw that in our sound drama. Very dramatic words in Revelation. Sobering, even a little frightening. But brothers, let's remember this. Armageddon is good news, because it's going to mean the salvation of the human family, including each of us. And more importantly, it's going to bring about the sanctification of Jehovah God's name. There is no more worthy goal than that. It will be a day that we will never forget.
I'm sure it will be a day that no one will forget. If it were to happen, which thankfully it won't, billions of men, women, children, and babies being slaughtered and picked apart by birds. I'm sure that's an image that's going to stay in your mind. But yes, Kent Fisher there, US Branch Committee member, reminding Jehovah's Witnesses to stay faithful regardless of how long they've been at it, even if they've been waiting for Armageddon for decades. They're being reminded that they are in the last of the last days. That's the phrase of the moment, I guess, isn't it? Thanks to Stephen Lett. And they're being told that each passing day brings us closer to Armageddon. Well, thanks for being so specific there. Thanks for sticking your neck out. Nothing vague at all, is there, about what he's just been saying? But really, this is a fitting way to conclude the convention. I mean, we started off with the program playing it safe, as I said in earlier rebuttals, and really just talking about Jesus. But the problem is, this is a cult that cannot help but show their true nature. We've already had an Armageddon Bible reading that's shown very graphically what people can look forward to if they are opposers, if they fail to become Jehovah's Witnesses. And now we're being told that Armageddon is good news. It's just around the corner. We're in the last of the last days. Gonna happen any day now. Basically the same old tired rhetoric, like a record on repeat. But at least they're being honest to some degree. They're putting their cards on the table and they're letting everyone know just how culty and doomsday they are.
And now, brothers, let's enjoy the final video of this convention. It focuses on the great privilege we have of preaching the good news and features the original song that we've all been practicing and that we're going to be singing together at the end of this program. Please enjoy.
Praise Jah for His light. Good news is good news. Preach with all your might. Good news, Christ is born. The way, the truth, the life. He will reign for righteousness. Peace He will provide. Jesus is the way to endless life. Truth He will defend. His kingdom will not end. Good news, this good news, joy for all mankind. Praise Jah for His light. Good news, this good news, preach with all your might. Good news, Christ is born. The way, the
another angel there monitoring the preaching work, which is apparently what they do invisibly. We've just been watching the final song from this year's Declare the Good News convention. It's kind of a tradition at this point that when they have conventions, they need to have like a rousing song that's going to be put to like a montage. And it's the task of Jehovah's Witnesses to learn that song so that after watching the montage video, at the very end of the convention, they all sing it together. So that's basically what we've just been watching. Apologies if you found the video quite triggering. I did slightly clip it because I realize it's going to be awkward viewing for many of you, particularly those raised as Jehovah's Witnesses. Very evangelical, very televangelist, isn't it? Very gospel, the whole feel of the productions, particularly the music videos. And, you know, that's been the case now for a number of years. But there were a couple of things about this particular music video I just wanted to draw your attention to. They start off with this montage of archive footage of Jehovah's Witnesses going right back to the 1914 photodrama of creation, obviously written or hosted at least by Charles Taze Russell. And this kind of links in quite well with what I was saying earlier about how disingenuous the organization is regarding its history. It glorifies the history and gives this kind of rose-tinted portrayal without allowing Jehovah's Witnesses to actually examine what the organization was teaching back then. So, for example, in the photodrama of creation, you'll find all sorts of nonsense about the earth being 42,000 years old, about the earth once having rings around it, that were inspired by this crackpot, essentially, called Isaac Vale. He believed that the flood was basically the collapsing of one of these rings. There was once a ring of water, and when that collapsed, it caused the deluge. So there's all sorts of nonsense. If you go to the Warwick headquarters and view their history exhibition, they actually show you slides from the photodrama. And as I point out in my documentary about the Warwick Bethel, thumbnail here, one of these slides even shows basically a racist teaching from the organization's past, that black people are the descendants of Ham, that the pigmentation of black people was somehow the product of a curse. The slide is right there at the headquarters. And it's a great example, I feel, of how Jehovah's Witnesses are just blindfolded regarding their history. They're not allowed to research properly into what their organization once taught. They're not allowed to research what was said about 1914 and about how 1914 was the very limit in terms of when Armageddon would come. Of course, that date came and went. So did 1925, another date pointed to in the organization's literature. But how are Jehovah's Witnesses supposed to know this if they're not given access to this material, which they could actually have? Because having spoken to former Bethelites, apparently Bethel elders do have access to this older material when they go on JW Library, when they go on Watchtower Online Library. So it is an active deceit that is going on. It is a deliberate decision to pull the wool over the eyes of Jehovah's Witnesses, and yet they have the gall to point to their history in this glorified, romantic way in the concluding song. And you also have this portrayal of angels kind of darting down to the earth, being sent out on missions to help the good news be preached, we assume. I just think it's worth going over this again. Again, this is a point I've made in past videos. But if you are watching this as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, think this through logically, please. So we're supposed to believe that Armageddon is being postponed until the good news has been preached sufficiently around the surface of the earth. Once enough people have heard the good news, that's when it will be time for Armageddon to come. Well, let's just think about this in terms of the coverage of the good news. What are your chances of hearing the good news if you're in North Korea? What are your chances of hearing the good news if you live in Iran? Or if you live in Afghanistan under the Taliban? Does it really make any difference what angels are doing if you live in one of those countries? I don't think it does. You could send a swarm of angels, and yet the statistical likelihood of people hearing the good news in those countries is so infinitesimal that realistically you're done for when Armageddon comes. If Armageddon were to be brought tomorrow, a disproportionate number of those who are dying would be coming from countries that are communist or countries that are Islamic. Let's just be honest about this. It's overwhelmingly, it seems, North and South America, Europe, Africa, parts of Asia that get to be in the paradise. Where you are born dictates your chances of survival at Armageddon. That's one of the main problems with this whole idea of the good news being spread all over the earth. And as to God holding off Armageddon until enough people have heard the message, it's worth reiterating, as I've said in previous videos, what about the ballooning of the global population? If God had brought Armageddon in 1914, when the last days supposedly began, the global population back then was 1.85 billion. In the year 2000, at the start of this century, the population was 6 billion, and now in 2024, the population is 8 billion. So the longer God waits, the more people are going to die, basically. The more billions of people there are on the planet to be slaughtered when Armageddon comes. None of this makes any logical sense. So I feel it's just worth going over that again for the benefit of those of you who perhaps haven't been able to think about this from a skeptical or logical point of view before. But this brings us to the end of our 2024 Declare the Good News convention, or at least my rebuttal of it. What can I say? It's definitely not the worst convention they've put out. There have been way worse conventions in the past in terms of the propaganda, in terms of the hateful, bigoted material that they've made people sit through. But there's certainly been a lot of disturbing, chilling moments in this year's convention. Moments that remind us just how toxic this group is, and that it's not really good news, is it? It's a doomsday message of fear. And when any kind of group relies on fear to drive its message home, this is a group you are best avoiding. So that's all I really have for you. I hope you've enjoyed this series of rebuttals. Don't forget that you can watch similar videos by subscribing to the Lloyd Evans channel. But that's all I have time for. Thank you so much for watching.